Kenmore City Council is now in session. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Culver,
Here.
Councilmember Marshall,
Present.
Councilmember Sassen,
Here.
Councilmember Shrubnik,
Here.
Councilmember Lutzes,
Here.
Deputy Mayor O'Kane,
Here.
Mayor Herbig,
Here.
all present.
All right, only an item on the agenda today is training, Emergency Operations Center training, operations for elected officials presented by North Shore Emergency Management Coalition. Emergency Manager Kevin Lowry.
Thank you.
Floor is
Thank you,
yours.
sir. Appreciate it. We get that put up there. Here we go. Perfect. So I've been here about, as we're just figuring out, 2 years-ish. This is too loud. We can hopefully adjust it a little bit. But I project my voice, but I know for the online, we want to have the microphone going, so I don't want to be yelling at you the whole night. So in May, it's about 2 years I've been here, as we were just discussing, but really the first time to talk to you in this kind of smaller group setting here about Emergency Operations Center pieces. And I know that there's some change on all the councils, both Lake Forest Park and Kenmore. So I'll get a quick chance to introduce myself. I'm Kevin Lowry, the emergency manager from North Shore Emergency Management Coalition. I'm handling your emergency management whole umbrella world that encompasses, right? So my background, for those who don't know me, I started working for local government when I was 19 as a summer cop down the shore in Jersey, 21 full-time police officer. I went to Merchant Marine Academy for college, which was a lot of oil spill cleanup. Basically taught how to drive ships, power ships, and clean up after ships. So in that realm of the cleaning up after ships, there's a lot of the emergency management stuff came from, right? Oil spill cleanup, HAZWOPER, and that was kind of the world I got into. While there, though, I joined, became a volunteer firefighter. So I started volunteering then, took a little break in service when I became a full-time police officer, and then went back to volunteering for a second run. And then kind of got bored of sitting in a police car, running radar under a tree for most of my days, and small town outside Princeton, so I was like, hey, I need something more. So I joined the Coast Guard Reserves and went to the Coast Guard, and then went on active duty with them, where I've also been involved with various hurricane responses, pollution response, things like that. So and while doing that, went back to college, got a couple master's degrees, one of which is emergency management. So it's kind of been the progression of my emergency management experiences behind a police car, in a fire truck, doing the ICS stuff, working for pollution response and hurricane response, running some search and rescue, but also the academic side of, hey, what's this system supposed to look like? What's the whole picture here? And what role does everyone play in that picture, in that cycle as we go? So that said, I have a very varying background, and I kind of try to bring that realistic approach of the operations side to a lot of the policies to make sure anything we're doing in policy or in our comprehensive emergency management plan makes sense to what's going to happen on the road or out in real life or in the EOC, so that the policy matches reality and reality hopefully matches best practices, so that we're providing the best services to the community, but also being able to kind of work through the cycle of response and recovery as quickly as we can to prepare for then in the kind of clear sky times, as FEMA likes to put it, when there's no giant eruption, no giant disaster we're dealing with, to do the mitigation and preparation work that we do in all the other times, right? So I kind of try to take a nice realistic approach to it. That said, this EOC for elected officials is essentially this is the fifth time I'm basically doing the same class, right? I gave this class to all the volunteers, Lake Forest Park City officials, both Kenmore's employees and Lake Forest Park's employees. So it's essentially the same class, which is your IS 2200 course, right? Am I familiar when I say the IS independent study for FEMA? I see a head shake. Good. So I'll take that opportunity to remind everybody that since you're serving in the community here, expected to play a role in the ICS system, you're required to take ICS 100 and 200 and IS 700 and 800. So that's your incident command structure, 100 and 200. And then it's really the NIMS piece, which is the National Incident Management Framework, 700, 800 courses, right? They're on FEMA's website. We can make sure you get a link to I know that Debbie had sent out to all the employees. We'll make sure you guys get the links as well. It's all independent studies. So the IS is the independent study piece. So FEMA has piles of independent study courses to kind of help everyone. It depends how far you want to go down the rabbit hole. If whatever specific job you might have, and a PIO has a whole branch of classes they can take. Logistics have a whole branch of classes. So in that is IS 2200, which is EOC operations. So this is essentially the 350 some odd slides of that condensed down to 40 43 slides or so, I think is what I have on this one. Yep, 44. But for you, especially since the role that elected officials play is a little bit different, right? You're not going to be in the EOC having to deal with the resource section or the operations section or the planning section, or really jumping into the planning P, right, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. You're not going to be directly involved in that. You're going to be removed from the EOC with a liaison, probably Rob, maybe Stephanie, who's going to come and discuss things with you because you're the policy group, right? The role you play is what ICS calls the MAC group, which you're kind of removed from the actual incident, the EOC structure and the response structure, which is even further removed from the EOC structure, which we'll see in a chart in a second. And you're there to provide overarching policy and strategy guidance to the responders, to the EOC who is supporting the responders. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Hopefully, this is a 350 slides condensed, right? But it still is about 2.5, almost 3 hours for the city employees. Lake Forest Park, I was able to get it done in about an hour for their city council members. So hopefully we can kind of move through it in a similar fashion, because really what I want you to get out of this is to understand that while you're with the policy group, having discussions, talking about approaches to recovery or response or anything like that, that what the EOC is doing. I want you to have a kind of a loose grasp of, hey, this is how the EOC is functioning while we're over here. So this way you have some faith, you understand that those of us in the EOC have your best interest in mind, are looking after the needs of the city, and understand a little bit of the process we're going through, so that when you say, hey, here's what we would like to do, maybe you'll get some pushback, but you'll understand why, or maybe maybe you won't, and you say, hey, this is how we're going to implement it, but here's the time frame, because this is how the planning piece cycle works, and you can kind of have that to check your expectations against, right? So that said, the overall objectives here today, we're going to describe the role of EOC, factors in staffing and organizing the EOC, factors in an effective EOC, and then considerations for deactivating. And of course, the last piece is the tabletop exercise, which I was not planning to do with you guys here, but essentially it's how we're implementing this. We can discuss it a little bit, but it's really meant for those inside the EOC. Biggest piece that I want you to take out of is the EOC is for coordination, right? The whole point of the EOC is to support the responders in the field. So if there's a massive fire call, right? There's an apartment fire and the fire chief's on scene as the incident commander, and it's going to take a day to fight, or they're engaged in fighting this fire, and we decide to open up an EOC. The role of the EOC is not to take control over the fire, right? To not start dictating who's fighting the fire on which floor, and should we get a ladder truck on the backside of the building, or any of that type of stuff. Those are the tactics of the incident. The EOC's purpose is to support what the fire department needs, support those responders, mostly ends up being through like logistics, communication, resource needs, long-term planning. So while the firefighters are fighting the fire, it's, well, where are we housing the people who are now displaced? So those types of broader questions that go past the response. So the coordination piece is demonstrating the NIMS principle of flexibility, right? We're adapting to jurisdictions' requirements across the agencies and disciplines. So one of the benefits of the ICS system and this NIMS system, it's a framework for a reason, not an SOP, not a direct policy guidance. It's a framework so it can be flexible, right? So we want flexibility in the system, so that, because each incident is slightly different, you want to be able to pivot to make the best accommodations. And then we can perform the incident command structures inside the EOC if it's a broader response, an earthquake, giant windstorm, something like that, where you're going to have tactics taking place in multiple locations. Then the incident command can come to the EOC. Or if for other reasons, there's no incident command has not yet been set up, but we already have an EOC. Example of that might be something like a large scale community event, right? Where we establish EOC for like a level 2, which we'll discuss in a second, like partial operation. We don't really need an actual commander standing there dictating anything, because it's say fireworks for the 4th of July, but you have 2,000 people in a park. So you have a structure providing some support where the firefighters are organized or the police are, checking in with. But then something happens, right? Then the EOC can kind of establish that command until the on-scene responders actually coordinate that. So it carries out the coordination functions through collecting, analyzing, sharing information. This is your common operating picture, essentially, getting all the information together, validating it, synthesizing it, and putting it back out in a way that everyone understands. The point there, and this is really important for you guys, is that we want to have a clear picture of what the current situation is and what's actually happening so that the decision makers, people who have to make the long-term decisions, can have the best information, valid information to make those decisions with. So that's where in EOC, the incident command, unified command, whatever structure's in there, then brings that through their liaison to the policy group, say, hey, here's our current situation. So that when we're talking about our plans, everything makes sense to say your long-term strategic goals for the city, right? And you can kind of put these things together. So continuing on the coordination front, we consolidate and exchange information. Again, we're supporting the decision makers. One thing you'll learn about me is I just talk as things come when we're going through the slides. So I don't really like read word for word. So hopefully we can skip other slides down the road, right? So again, this is just supporting the decision makers through having this common picture. And again, the tactics are not done in the EOC. The EOC is doing the support, the objectives, the strategies, the tactics are done by incident command in the field. I guess the other piece here is just facilitate from which multiple agencies, organizations can coordinate. So you have an incident where maybe it's like that fire I gave you the example of, the fire chief's doing the primary thing. Well, if that building fire is affecting traffic on 3 blocks around that, well, now the police chief has to get involved, there's police supervisors get involved. Oh, but there's some casualties, so, well, here the fire department still takes that. I mean, maybe the medics will have a little separate piece of that where they'll have a branch or a subunit off of operations. Say, hey, we're going to deal with triaging and transporting and treating all of the injured persons over here. So, or Red Cross starts coming in and handling sheltering. So now all of those pieces are coordinated through the EOC and the incident command system. Here's kind of just your structure. This is in your 700, 800. So for some of you, hopefully you've seen this chart before. For those of you who are maybe new to the council, you will when you take those online classes. This is your national incident management system. This is the framework. The 3 main components are communications, information management. Here is a lot of your fusion center work. So you hear about the State Fusion Center. That comes out of that. Your resource management, right? That's your resource typing pre-incident. We're going to find out what we have, how many snowplows we have in the city, how many snowplows we have in the county because the city's reported in, right? And then your actual command and coordination. This is the piece we're working in when you talk about an EOC. They do resource management too. So there's some bleed over, but this is what we're talking about when we're dealing with our actual incidents. Your general structure, and again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is more of a reminder because it might have been a while. The ICS 100, 200, 700, and 800 that I'll keep saying and talking about, they're good for life, right? I took mine in 2005. So you need a refresher every once in a while. So this is your top tier of the structure. You have your incident command, be it an individual or a unified command, and the command staff. So the command staff's there directly to support the incident command. And then the general staff's there to execute the mission, right? To take that 201, the incident action plan that is developed through the process, and then go out and actually do the work in implementing it. The command staff here supports the incident commander as they develop those objectives, and it keeps a broader picture of what's happening. So it's a standardized approach to command, control, and coordination. Standardized approach is important because a lot of the terms we use, and honestly, that's one of the biggest parts of my job, but one of the most consistent parts of my job is as I'm reading through policies or I'm looking at even just a basic chart or matrix is like, hey, this isn't compliant with our current standardized terms, right? So even just making sure the terms stay compliant. So that standardization, and it's not just between Lake Forest Park and Kenmore. It's not just between King County and Kenmore. It's not just King County and Washington State. It's nationally, right? These are nationalized standard terms. So the EOC is a critical link in the response, right? It coordinates the on-scene incident managers and their agencies really to acquire and allocate and track resources. So when an incident's too big and we need more resources, the EOC is the point for that logistical coordination. Manage and share information. Again, that's that common operating picture. SITPIC is the term that this course uses. And then liaison coordinate with other jurisdictions at other levels. And I'll talk about that. It's up and down the chain, but also laterally if you need to borrow resources from another town. And provide legal and financial and administrative support. So that's kind of checking in with your city attorney, checking in with the finance department to make sure what we're trying to do we can afford to do. That's all done again through the EOC. And then this is the piece where you guys start to come into the picture, is this what ICS calls the multi-agency coordination group or the policy group, right? In our case, it's multi-agency, it's City of Kenmore, right? But if we have, say, an earthquake in the whole region, it'll be you guys and Lake Forest Park sitting down together to talk about a coordinated effort and those strategies and saying, how do we honor what both of our constituents want while we respond to their overarching incident? And then biggest thing here is you're determining resource prioritization allocation among the incidents, enabling decision-making among elected and appointed officials, the incident command. So that's the that's the ball of wax. We want everyone in that chain to be able to make decisions with as much information as they have, communicated as efficiently and as clearly as it can be throughout the whole incident, because things are constantly evolving and changing. So it seems very simple. It's like we just want to, okay, turn on the news and see what's happening, but you're getting information at a very rapid pace. So the EOC is a great buffer there to then also validate some of the things we're seeing. We're not just opening up Nextdoor and seeing what everyone's posting, right? We're validating what's actually also being said too. And here's kind of that structure in the response. So this is, the MAC group kind of operates up here, right? The policy group. You guys are operating really on the top of the pyramid here, where it's that broader policy, that broader strategic goal for the city, and making sure we're still in line, setting those larger policies. They overlap because city manager, right? And our decision makers, right? They're going down to be in the unified command or the incident command, but have to come back up and check in with the policy group, right? The overarching elected or appointed officials. Now the EOC really works in this piece here, right? Again, like I said, why it goes up the policy, but it takes the brunt of the coordination, but again, it still touches ICS. ICS goes into that realm because you can have your incident commander in the EOC, but the structure and the model is pretty consistent, right? When we look at that command and that general staff chart, if we weren't having an EOC and a fire chief showed up to a scene, all of those responsibilities would be with that fire chief, right? And that's where span of control comes in. That's where this is a modular system. So we don't need to necessarily have a PIO at every fire call, right? We don't need to have logistics sections stood up or planning sections stood up at every fire call, but they're still responsible for those parts of the response system. So they do exist. So that's why ICS starts here and goes all the way through your actual operation response and responders. So that's why it's used in the EOC as that standardized approach to response to the incident. So there's a whole bunch of benefits to why we want to have a well-organized EOC. This is, this lists over many things I've already probably said. Mainly your big conduit for information to pass through from the responders all the way up to the policy group, right? To help you guys have the best information you can. We want to be able to pass it up to a higher level coordination, the county or the state. We want to be able to allow incident commanders to focus on managing just the incident. That's that span of control piece, right? If they show up and they're responsible for all of this, how do we start offloading it? And that's where the EOC starts giving that support to the responders. So we can start offloading those responsibilities and then promote problem resolution at the lowest level. And again, that strategic guidance and direction, right? That's that's your piece of the process. So EOC enables multi-agency coordination, things we already talked about. And then really the three parts of this command and coordination part is the information management, resource management, and planning. Okay, so I think I've kind of harped a little bit so far on this, but the planning piece goes into, in the EOC, you're not necessarily planning for right now, right? Right now is already happening. The tactics are taking place on the fire ground. The road crews for public works are out there chopping up trees that are blocking roadways and trying to clear debris, right? They're out there doing the now. What you're planning for is the next operational cycle, right? So when we see the planning P chart, that's talking about the next operational cycle. When they're done doing the tasking they were just given. And operational cycles could be 2 hours, it could be 4 hours, it could be 12 hours, it could be a week, right? It could be a month, all right? If you were to use the ICS system for planning large things, say like the Super Bowl, which it is used for that, the operational cycle might be a month. Hey, here's our goals for this month. And they're not sitting in a room 24/7 for a month, but they're having those meetings scheduled, but they're using the system, right? So that operational cycle can be very different. Most of our cases, when we're talking about disasters and emergencies out in the city, you're going to look at ones going between, say, 2 to 12 hours, right? If you have most fire chiefs can handle a 2, 4-hour fire, right? It's when you get past many, shift change, or resources have to get refueled, or new, water or anything like that. You start having to replenish and rehab resources. Then you start saying, well, what's our operational cycle should it be? And on average, ends up being about 12 hours. So in the EOC, whatever that's been determined, you're planning for that next cycle. For example, when I plan like a search and rescue case, it might be 2 hours of initial searching, but then we start planning for the next 2 hours and maybe deciding, well, maybe we'll do a 4-hour search if we don't find anything, right? And that cycle can change. So that's something it's hard to get your mind around sometimes, how that's a fluid thing. So EOCs also manage the operations such as emergency shelters, points of distribution. This is one of those support pieces that are very important to our city, right? That if residents do lose the ability to stay in their apartment complex, finding new homes for them are important. Resheltering them at least temporarily somewhere else are important. When we have an earthquake or a windstorm and we're without power for 2 weeks, right? Getting people water, blankets, heaters, fuel for their generators, things like that become an important part of the EOC's work. So, and then direct tactical operations with incident commander is not established, which I kind of already talked about. It's a rare occasion, but it could happen. Those planned community events are the best example. Coordinate efforts on several geographically separated incidents. So this is where incident command oftentimes goes into your EOC because it's a windstorm and we have large trees coming down 2 different spots on 522 and 6 other side streets, but the resources you're using for that are all public works, or maybe the fire company who happen to have saws on their trucks, right? You look at, okay, what can we do with these resources? And the EOC is making those decisions to say, here's how we're dispersing them. So the command and those tactics could take place in the EOC in that situation, because not each tree isn't going to be establishing its own command structure. Make sense? And then provide coordinated policy direction. A lot of these, the best example of this is kind of like, well, you're going past normal work hours, right? So, okay, what's in individual contracts between Public Works and the city? Or is this a contracted employee and what's in that contract? Is recall policy in their HR agreement that they can be recalled to come in and staff the EOC or come back into work? And if they are, what's the cost? And that's that policy piece and coordination that takes place in the EOC, and then is confirmed by the city saying, yes, this is the thing we want to do. And then an area command, we can conduct one for an area command. Area command is really a much broader piece, but it echoes what a unified command would be doing, right? So if an event took place in both cities or across the county, that's where they might do a broader coordination. And here's this communication I'm talking about. So I'll start up here. This is the lateral movement and the role the EOC plays. So we have multiple incidents taking place, gas leaks and a fire, and the EOC is managing all of this, right? We run out of resources. You start asking for resources laterally, right? We call Shoreline or Woodinville and say, hey, we need some fire trucks. And the EOC is going to do that communication. There's a thing, we do it routinely with Shoreline Fire Department, which is called a resource emergency. And if you're familiar with this, I don't know if anyone's aware of it or not. You have a battalion chief, you have a daytime battalion chief as well. They're kind of backing each other up. Our battalion chief, when the call volume just naturally gets too high for lots of first aid calls, car accident, two different fire alarms going off and a gas leak, they go into what's called a resource emergency. So NORCOM, who normally just dispatches them automatically based off what the card says, right? The alarm card, they'll dispatch the proper units. Well, when they have a resource emergency, the battalion chief takes control over that. So NORCOM's no longer dispatching units. They start stacking them in the computer system. The battalion chief goes to 61, sits down in his operations center, and starts deciding, okay, well, what resources am I sending where, and how am I prioritizing who needs what? So the gas leak might have to be tabled until the actual fire is out or that accident scene is cleared up, but he's managing the resources. And that's a small version of what happens in the EOC when you have that resource emergency. So when that takes place, ask for mutual aid, right? Equally, when we've passed our resources, because if I do a community preparedness talk and I'm expressing to the community, something like 30% of the community believes that if you just dial 911, there's always gonna be something that pops up and they don't worry about planning. So I try to stress to the community. So if you hear me saying this, don't worry. It's just to hopefully get the community to start preparing more. But the idea is, in a big disaster, you might call 911, we might be out of resources, right? So you try to teach everyone, hey, if you get your go bag in your car or in your house and you're taken care of and you can make it through a 2-week period without power, and then your family is taken care of, you have enough medications that for everybody, including the dog, and you have plenty of blankets and all the things, and you have enough to hit the wires. That was doing that. You have enough stuff going on that you can take care of your own household, your family, and then okay, well the neighbor gets together with like the old Map Your Neighborhood program, or just your community watch or whatever, or just hey, let's all organize, and the block is taken care of. Then when you go past those resources, now you say, okay, well, what's our development doing, right? And you kind of keep growing, right? The federal government, that's the way this is all designed, right? So we're not just going to go ask FEMA for help right off the bat. It's when we can't handle what we have with the resources we have at our level, it grows to county, to state, and then up the federal government. So this is what this is basically saying. We have to request resources in this order, and that's all again done through the EOC. We have a great tool called WebEOC, which, so long as there's internet, should work. We have a robust backup in our ham operators who, people don't realize this, they're a huge tool because you can send data over ham radio. And basically those emails that would normally go through the internet, requesting those resources, can go through the ham. And we test that twice a year, sending requests we can go all the way down to the Fusion Center if we needed to. So again, benefits, basically we're helping improve coordination, simplifying our information analysis and processing, and then being able to understand our resources, where they are, what their status is, and where they need to go, right? The only other thing here is it improves that continuity. This goes into your planning piece, right? When we're doing the planning P, say the incident commander right now, because you can't be up 24/7, right? Hey, here's our overarching objectives, right? That's the teamwork between you guys at the policy group and the unified command. Here's our incident objectives. Here's the strategies we're going to take to get there, right? Those are those conversations at the EOC policy group level. Here are the tactics. The tactics are each shift, each incident commander making a decision. When we set those objectives and strategies at the top, and then the first things you read on the top of the 201, the incident action plan, and our work period of 12 hours writes an incident action plan for the next work period. When they come into work, they read it, they look at it, okay, got it, we understand your objectives, we understand your strategies, we understand what the guiding principles here of what we want to accomplish, okay, and they start planning for the next operational period. They're implementing the plan, they're taking the same objectives and strategies and expanding them to the next operational period, and that allows for continuity in your response. So now we're not reinventing the wheel and just somebody else comes in and does a relief and says, I got it, I'm incident commander now, and we're starting from scratch, right? No, we're building on those incident action plans, and that helps communicate those objectives and strategies so that this way there's continuity in the response effort. All right, and this is kind of the piece where what an EOC does. I'm talking about taking those hats off, right? All those things that the incident commander shows up and he has all these responsibilities. Situational awareness, including the safety, right? Fire chief shows up, the next person is usually a safety officer. You have a really, say an active shooter situation, police officer shows up, then the next one, safety officer, making sure that they know where all of their officers or firefighters are and everyone's safe. That's that part of that situational awareness picture. So when we pull that up into the EOC for the broader incident, you're kind of taking that off their shoulder. They still do the individual safety piece, of course, for accountability of their personnel on the scene, but you're expanding that out and taking control over that. It's one of the key functions. Policy direction, I think I mentioned a few times, but again, I stress it with you guys. This is the role you'll mostly be taking. Communication support, right? And we'll talk about redundancy and such later, but the idea is that PCERN is one system. If it has that's the new Puget Sound Emergency Response Network, right? All of our police and fires on that, Public Works, everyone can communicate through that. If that failed for some reason, say if there's an urban wildfire or a wildfire in general, and the repeater maybe they're trying to hit melted because there's a fire near it, because while the tower is made out of metal and survives, all the parts are plastic, right? So for some reason that goes down, having some redundant systems in place and providing additional support for that. Or just when the dispatchers are overwhelmed, right? I worked in a command center on the East Coast during Hurricane Harvey. Somebody got a hold of the phone number for the Coast Guard, and that phone number was headquarters, right? So it was hitting the Gulf region, and everyone's flooding and needing to be rescued. And They figured out the Coast Guard's phone number. We actually had to hide it for like a year afterwards, so people would stop calling it. But they called, and their phones automatically got overwhelmed. So they flooded down to our center, and then our phones quickly got overwhelmed. And then we had to, so it kept trickling down. And that's that other part of that support. When NORCOM, that resource emergency I mentioned with the shoreline fire, when NORCOM is getting so many calls, well, having the ability to have a radio piece back here or in Station 51 that can also take over, speaking on PCERN and helping dispatch resources for our own resource emergency is helpful to provide top cover for the other dispatch entity too. Talked about our resource piece, strategic planning, I've touched on a bit, and then the legal and financial support. Again, that's checking that what we're doing is legal and we can afford to do it before we go committing to, say, buying a crane, right? Or renting a crane for a day. How much does a crane cost? I only use this example because we used to rent them for the ship. They're like $5,000 a day, right? So you say, oh, it'd be really easy to move all this stuff if we've got a crane. Oh, but that's going to be 3 days worth of work. That's going to be $15,000. Is that in our budget somewhere, right? So having that check in the resource section is great. All right, so this is more for our facility. Our primary EOC is Station 51. Secondary is the bottom of Lake Forest Park. A lot of this is when we pick those locations, it's considering factors like this, right? What are the threats to it? What are the hazards? What are the facility requirements? This is an awesome room, big room, right? Lots of tables, lots of tech, great room. Why wouldn't this be our EOC? What would be bad about the windows? So if you have your decision makers in here having these hard discussions about, well, where are we sending that fire truck? Where's the ambulance? That guy's having a heart attack. This person's calling because they can't get out of their house because it's flooding in their attic, right? And no, but we can't help them. We can help this person, right? Do you want a news camera outside looking in, watching you, right? No, not necessarily. So it's those types of things you gotta think about in a facility. The next piece is like, okay, hey, we're gonna have a meeting. Planning section is gonna go have a meeting in a breakout room, right? You need to have that, make sure there's enough core rooms and then separate rooms, right? So those other pieces add into it. This room's great for the JIC, which is what I would use it for, right? You have your joint information center, your press conferences, your meeting with the community. And guess what? The policy group, where's a great place for them to meet. Really cool room back here with tables, there's coffee in there, there's a bathroom, we have a radio in there to keep you informed, right? It's just a walk up from the primary EOC. So that's the facilities piece of thinking about this stuff. Of course, you worry about your equipment requirements and communication, which is what we're working through right now, kind of make sure we're on par with kind of modern needs of an EOC. All right, so your activation levels here, these are the piece to take out of this is your level 3 is you're just monitoring. We know what's going on, something's about to happen, but we're keeping an eye on it. A lot of what my job is monitoring. I send Rob and the other key partners in NEMCO, if there's a heat wave coming, usually a slide deck of here's what the actual expected thing is. This is what NOAA's saying. Here's what King County is saying in our weekly meetings and maybe a special meeting for the event. Here's what I think is the best interest for our response. Here's where we're sending people to shelter, this type of thing. Level 2 is your partial activation. That is, remember the shoreline incident 2 years ago now, probably, a year and a half, the trench rescue that took place, right? So they had 2 people working in a trench. It was actually a family-owned business. It was the owner and a worker, not the son, who was his partner. They were able to, because it was family-run business, they were able to negate a lot of the safety regulations that existed. So they could step aside from that. They actually ended up working outside the permit zone. So it was kind of a lot of flags went up of there becoming an incident. There was a collapse. They got trapped in there. Quickly, they figured out that they had succumbed to their injuries. But in that situation, you have the fire department responds, right, to go do some tasking, to do their work. They're on scene with incident command, running the operations section essentially, but, we need other resources. We need a crane. We need other safety equipment. We don't have that here. So eventually about, a day and a half into the incident, they stand up a partial EOC for the resource section to try to acquire and figure out how to pay for those, that crane and the other resources they needed at scene so that they can finish up the call, which essentially is a body recovery, which is not necessarily their primary piece at that point, but they had the subject matter expertise to work in the trench and such. Then your full scale activation, that's your 24/7 operation. So when I say we're going to activate the EOC, we're not talking about, it doesn't need to jump right to 24/7 operations where everyone's here and the whole piece is expanded upon. It's a modular system There's a level 2 piece, which is probably the most frequent one, which is some parts are needed, but not the whole thing, depending on what the incident is. But these are the 3 levels. They're in your CEMP. They're mirroring in the FEMA levels. So it's all, again, that standardization within the response network. This is our typing, and this is kind of a fun chart because really what helps you think about it as well, does every incident need an EOC? Does every incident need ICS? Really, yes, every incident should have ICS. As a former police officer, we are horrible at that, right? You don't see police officers pulling up the call saying, I'm establishing command. Doesn't rarely ever happen. Some of my really bad accidents when I was a traffic cop, I did because I knew I was going to have something that was larger. But who's really good at that? And who I keep giving them examples because they're really good at it. It's the fire department. Every time they show up, even if it's a simple cat in a tree, you know, they're on scene or establishing command, and they use the ICS system for every call. So when you have down here your type 5 incidents where it's a cat stuck in a tree and you have 1 fire crew, maybe a cop, I have a few pictures of me climbing trees, working for a short period of time to help resolve the incident within 1 operational period, level 5. Do you need an EOC for that? No, probably not, right? I see head shaking. Work up to this piece, right? You have a couple crews, right? To a larger crew. Maybe it takes them a little bit longer. The clocks are kind of supposed to be operational periods, but it's just a duration of time, right? So the incident's going to take you a little bit longer. EOC? Probably not, right? Right. This is just, okay, this is a 3-car accident instead of a 2-car accident. Type 3. I like this guy. The guy pointing, you have a boss, right? Someone telling everybody else what to do in there, and a lot of workers for a pretty decent period of time. EOC? Maybe, right? You know, put words to your face with it. Yeah, maybe, right? Yeah, maybe. That's where you start. I would start considering these are FEMA-based typing of incidents, but around your level 3 marks where you start saying, okay, you know, this might require it. And one of the pieces you think about, because we're comparing this for the size of the incident, the scope of the incident, and the complexity of the incident as it grows, right? So if we're going to that car accident and we find out that there's hazmat on board, and it's like, whoa, time out. This is a very complex response now. Now we're going to bring in a hazmat team, right? That could change the picture. So that complexity of the incident could say, yeah, really complex incident could say level 5 needs to be. But generally, it's around your level 3 when it's serious and it's going to be a very complex response. Then your type 2 and type 1, obviously more bosses, more people, a lot more bosses. Looks like there's a chain of command going on over there, right? Plenty of bosses and a long period of time. The more complex, the larger the scope, the bigger the size of the incident, the more you're gonna need the EOC. And clearly the extended operational periods. And again, I harp on those operational periods being anything that it's set to be, but you get the picture there. So, and this is the next piece here, your staffing considerations. So there's a chart I'll show you. It's Ken Moore's org chart for the EOC. The big key is you need to have your successors designated, right? So mayor, deputy mayor, right? I'd go down 3 deep. So you know, okay, well, if neither of you are there, who's taking charge? Well, you're not here. Right? So that's the thing about it, though. Think about it, and the big thing with any kind of delegation, make sure, you know, if it needs to be in writing, it's all done ahead of time. If it you know, it needs to be noted in any kind of document, like, oh, it goes, well, it's probably a whack that covers who would take over as far as the most senior elected official, that type of stuff. So this way your succession takes place, because you all, I'm sure, live in Kenmore because you're elected officials, but not all of this employees do, right? Right? I know Lake Forest Park has one that comes from Cle Elum. Right? Some time of the year, they might not come to work because of the past, right? So that's something to consider. So can everybody get in? NUD is, for some reason, everyone likes to live out past Sultan and Monroe, and you know, a lot of their actual crews live further away. So think about that, about the staff, and making sure that they can't make it to the EOC, make it into the get recall that exists. So here's your staffing chart for the EOC. But this is a piece up here too, because a lot of EOCs, Kirkland, Mercer Island did this, where when you don't have the incident command in the EOC, because of the type of the incident is, the EOC manager or director, which is usually the emergency manager, just ends up overseeing the happenings of the EOC, so that, you know, we're still supporting the incident, supporting the response, but you don't necessarily need to have the top part there. This is a lot of times your fire calls, your big, long, your long fire calls and stuff. You still oftentimes have the public information officer because if it's getting enough attention, you still want to have that happening. But here's the depth, and this is not every time, right? This would be a level what? Yeah, you're like your level 1 activation, right? But you can have sections of this, and this is generally, I wrote this to kind of pick, okay, well, what types of incidents might these have? When we actually have the incident, we might be renaming branches or might be renaming units because it'll be in the nature of the event. But this gives you an idea of who would be in what position. Because the other piece with your staffing considerations is you want to take people who are doing the job they do on a regular basis and have it married as closely to the job they're doing in the EOC. So your biggest thing with communications is the interoperability redundancy piece down here, right? I'm just going to kind of highlight the key points rather than keeping you here all night. But interoperability is box been checked with pCERN. It's a great system. It works really well for interoperability for the most part. We're still working out some talk group stuff, but that's mostly a public works and utilities issue. That allows for very smooth interoperability. Your scalability and portability, again, it kind of checks the box a bit with pCERN. But the other piece is with the system we're building with the GMRS, FMRS, ham operators as a redundant system to that, also kind of checks a lot of that box because we have portable ham systems, mobile hams. And then that also going down to resiliency, redundancy. When I was doing your CMP specifically, and I started describing what we're doing with the volunteer corps, the state was like, well, that hits ESF 2, 4, 7, 6, 5. So a lot of that communication piece, especially, having the backup be the ham radios and the GMRS systems that we're using, really checked a lot of those boxes for resiliency and redundancy. The big difference in that, the difference in the two words, is that your ability for a system to withstand and perform after damage or loss of the infrastructure, right? So the more types of systems you have, the more backups to the equipment you have, the more resilient and the more redundant. Redundant is having, okay, pCERN and then ham and then GMRS and FMRS, a different type, the choices to go from, cell phone to, whereas your resiliency is the ability to say, okay, we just lost a cell phone tower, but we have 3 more in the area that are going to cover, so cell phones still work. Oh, we lost all 3. Now do we have a redundant backup, right? And security does kind of talk about your ability to make sure that anything we're sharing, that's where the windows come in, right? If we're talking about PII, we're talking about, hey, there's a at-risk segment of our population who's now displaced and homeless that we're not airing that out for the whole community to be aware of, right? Biggest piece here, this is talking about your SIP pick. This is that common operator picture I'm talking about. The making sure that in the EOC we know what's happening and having that be able to plug that in here so you can see it as a part of the policy group, right? Because everybody should be able to see the same information. A big part of this step that was validating that information, right? You just don't want to hear something I could say on Nextdoor, but like there's a report of this and say, okay, and just send a bunch of resources to it and find out that it was someone's cat and not a jaguar, right? Something like that. But you don't want to send all these resources because those resources are better prioritized, say, saving someone's life or in a car accident. So validating that information is very important. And this kind of just talks about the process where you validate it, kind of boil it down here to a presentable product, and then being able to provide updates and sharing it with the group. So we use WebEOC, right? The second quarter training that I'm putting together for the cities that I'm happy to also give you guys is really focusing on WebEOC and our paperwork side of the EOC. There is a GIS mapping layered module in there that gives you a great picture of what's happening. Where are the fuel spills? Where are the fires at? It marries in pretty well with radar, which is your police and fire responding software, right? And the other pieces of that is the ability to then, of course, when you don't have any of these software working, breaking out a map and plotting things on a map, right? So again, that's your redundancy and your resiliency in the system. Because while I personally, outside of playing with EOC for some events, knock on wood, I haven't had to really pull it out and use it. Talking to other EMs, one of the issues they have as well is it really as robust as they advertise it to be, and is the county as responsive to our needs through it? Because a lot of our resource requests are done through that, but it's done through that, and then everyone backs up with an email, and that's where being able to say that, send that data, regardless of whether we have connectivity, is important. So All right, of course, documentation, this is easy. Everyone understands it's public reporting requirements, right? When the incident's over, it's public record. So we got to kind of seal it all up and make sure everything's preserved. And this is just listing off kind of everything that we need to preserve, including our web EOC, any written documents, you know, because if we go to the doing on the forms, we have to be able to save all of that. But the EOC, your documentation unit within your planning section does this in your EOC. That's why you pair in someone from the city clerk's office usually. Public information. So your joint information system, which is the whole group of the whole process. But the most important part is your joint information center, probably be in this room. But the system is basically getting all your trained PIOs together. So, right, the police department has their own, fire department has their own, the city has theirs, right? Getting everyone together to help craft the same message and make sure we're putting out the same message to the community. This is, again, where your role comes in, because even though you have a PIO who's going to write, maybe release, maybe be the one recording the voice recording, maybe the one giving the press conference, right? The fire department uses their direct PIO often, right? That's the one in front of us. It's not the fire chief because he's doing other work, right? So, but in a bigger incident, you know, our earthquake, our windstorm, our plane crash, our building fire, that's affecting a large part of your constituents, they're probably going to want to see someone from the city council getting up there and giving them an update, telling them what's going on, right? So this is where having your presence is super important, being able to be near the JIC, in the JIC, that's why I like that room, to then have that conversation to be the face of the community. And so they know their leaders are there, their leaders are present, they're looking out for their interests throughout the event. This is, you'll play a big part in that, making sure that building of public trust, public confidence, and making sure that everyone's aware of what's happening. And there's a rumor of, well, the saying is that, where there's absence of information, there's rumors, right? So making sure you get information out there as much as you can, as quickly as you can, is important. So, and you have a big role in that. And then even when they're crafting them, when your PIOs are crafting those messages, that's again, those larger strategic goals of having them, the liaison, be kind of vetted through our policy group is important. Really quick with this, because this is your ICS 100, 200 stuff. That's a refresher. This is expectation setting. That's the only reason I put this on here, is because I want, especially for you guys as elected officials, when everyone's calling you and saying, hey, I know my trash cans haven't been picked up, all the stuff you normally deal with. Well, in an emergency, it gets even worse, right? So an event happened, right? Incident takes place. The incident has needs. Those needs will grow and then fall off. At the only point, there's only one point on this arc where the actual resources we have available to throw out those needs are gonna pair up. And there is going to take time for that to happen. So we're gonna have an incident. It's gonna take a little bit of time before we start ramping up incidents and ramping up resources. And they're not gonna marry till it peaks. And once they're on scene, we have enough resources on scene dealing with the incident needs drop off, and then we can start kind of demobilizing resources, right? This is all about expectation setting. So when you talk to someone and they're calling you and they're complaining about why that road is still closed, being able to have that conversation with them. This is just the process we go through to demobilize mobilize and demobilize a resource. It's not just, hey, we need this, let's make a phone call. There's more to it. Understanding these incident objectives, strategies, and tactics, right? The tactics help you identify what you actually need out there. And in the EOC, they're making these decisions, how to acquire and get something, getting it on scene, tracking it while it's here, saying, okay, we don't need it anymore, and reimbursing and restocking it, right? Because that ambulance that comes back after treating that patient needs to get bandages put back on it, oxygen tanks refilled, all that, right? So you got to worry about that. Even if you're not going to release that ambulance to go away from the incident, they have to get restocked. Here's the planning P. So for your piece in this, you'll probably be attending some briefings, being briefed separately, but I want you to, this is important to understand because this is the bread and butter of what the EOC is doing, operating within this planning P. The leg of it is the incident taking place, right? Incident happens, notification, right? We work through that initial response. At some point on that leg, the incident command, it gets rapidly out of control. Oh my, we need to open up the EOC. This is more than what we got. They make that decision, right? They establish a unified command or an incident command, and then they start developing their overall incident objectives. Here's your strategy meetings with your command and general staff. Tactics meetings, right? You're preparing for this. You're having the meeting. You prepare for it. You have the meeting. You write the incident action plan, right? That incident action plan is for the next operational period. You still have your responders are dealing with what's going on. And the response world, the first thing is to do is to make sure it doesn't get any worse, right? Hold what you have, make sure it doesn't get worse, try to make it get as better as you can until you get more resources, back to that chart, to help you be able to get ahead of whatever your problem is. You have your operational briefing. This is the piece where every operational period, the new people coming on watch or coming to work and joining the EOC, you have a brief, you sit down. I know when I'm talking to city employees, nobody watched World War II movies. But if you ever watch, like, you know, the new Masters of Air one or the old Memphis Belle, or when they sit down and say, hey, here's our mission, we're flying over Germany, here's where we're dropping bombs, this is what we're doing, here's the plan. Everyone in the room was involved in that mission. Everybody there had a role to play, from a tail gunner to a maintenance guy to the actual pilot of the aircraft, right? Everybody got the same brief and was aware of what's happening. That's what this is, right? That's everybody that's involved in the incident, the people coming on shift. And if maybe it's not every public works worker, or it should be, but it's at least their supervisor who then goes and briefs them. But everybody who's involved gets that operational brief. It includes safety requirements. It includes, here's their strategies, here's our goals, here's our overarching policies. We're not doing X, but we are doing Y. If someone asks you, this is what you're allowed to tell them about with the event, that type of briefing. And then they go to work, right? They go out and they start doing the good deeds. And then the cycle starts over again, because the people who are not going out and doing the good deeds and implementing the incident action plan are working in the EOC to plan for that next operational period, to develop the next incident action plan, to get things implemented and going. If you understand that cycle? And then this is, I think, all right, almost towards the end of my slide deck. This is to also set expectations. Recovery is not, hey, we've demobilized everybody in the EOC. We've stood down, we're doing our after action report. Great job, everybody. We saved the world. Things are great, right? All done. You don't have to think about this ever again. It's not true, right? This is your recovery process. So your disaster takes place. Your initial response is the first day or two, the first operational period or two, where you're really just holding what you have, making sure things don't get worse, trying to make things as better as you can. That's that immediate short-term piece, with that short-term piece. Then you have your intermediate, kind of like, hey, the next couple of weeks or months after the incident plays, we've rolled down the EOC. Maybe it's gone down to a level 2, or once a week we have a meeting about the status. Like COVID probably sounds familiar, right? You're having weekly meetings to see what's going on, right? But this is your kind of, hey, we got, yeah, the construction progress to fix that burnt down shopping mall is going to take this long, and here's what we're getting for permits. But then there's a long-term, months and years. That's your capital projects. You're replacing a road. Hey, this disaster is really bad, but it helped us realize that we should have been rerouting drainage a different way, because the slide wouldn't have been so bad, and we have to rebuild that road. So here's the engineers are getting together to come up with a plan for that. That's that longer term part of recovery. That's still part of your incident. I went to Yellowstone a few weeks ago, and I used the example there. They had the big floods 2 years ago, took out their main entry road. They rebuilt another one. But, you know, they were 2 years into it, and they're like, oh, the road's moving 2 inches a year because it's on a slide path, right? So it's like, oh, so they know they're not done. They got to replan another road. How are you repairing the original? What are the choices to make? Still relating to a flood that took place two years ago, but it's a long process. And that's where your engineers and the long-term urban planning and all of that part, that's a lot of the what probably sounds like your regular meetings, but still relating to the incident and how you're part of that recovery on the long term. And really, it's one of the biggest impacts you have once you leave the actual incident, is that those recovery efforts, those plans you have to change your community and adjust to whatever the disaster was, that sits on your desk when the incident's over or we're deep into that recovery. So deactivation, the only big thing here is just don't take things away until we know we don't need them anymore. Let the incident, if you are, let the incident commander know, right? And I go a little more in depth with the city employees about how like the span of control works and taking those hats off. But before you toss a hat back on them, make sure that they're aware of it, right? Make sure we're communicating like, hey, we're ready to shut the EOC down. Fire chief, you're still out there cleaning up this. Can you handle that, right? That's that conversation. All right, so that was the what goes on in the EOC part of this. That's the quick run through of 300 slides. So what's your role in that, right? So you're overall, according to FEMA anyway, responsible for ensuring the public safety and welfare of the people of the jurisdiction. You're providing strategic policy that makes sure that you have, these are our incident prioritization, right? You're the overarching check to the balance to make sure we're hitting our responsibilities of the first thing that we're worrying about is life safety. The next thing is incident stabilization. and then your property conservation, which includes our environmental and economic impacts. So if you hear a plan coming back from someone from the EOC and saying, well, here's what we're doing. We're really worried about the pollution getting into the river. So we're laying out boom and we're starting to stop that from happening. And you ask, well, has everyone been triaged and transported to the hospital? And they're like, oh no, we're still working through that, right? This is your check to say, hey, that's our first priority. You know, we need to make sure that we're protecting life safety first. Are we harming that objective by can we lay boom and look out for the environment at the same time? Yeah, of course we can. If we have enough people, we can. If it's one person with a certain training doing the treatment, and we have, you know, a public works person with no EMT training or no first aid training to go do the environmental stuff, sure you can. But to check to make sure that we're following our prioritizations, that we're taking care of life safety first. And then incident stabilization, and then the environmental impacts. So that's just an important part where you're that checks and balances those overarching strategy. So it goes the other way. If you're going to start setting policy and start saying, hey, we really want these things done. Hey, I really know that my neighbors complain to me every time when the snow's not plowed on my street. So let's do this street first, right? But it's like, oh, but we really need 522 done because that's how we get to the hospital, right? Oh, okay. So think about that when you're starting to set policy too. And this part I kind of talked about with the PIOs, right? You're leading the public through the incident. You're representing their interests to the response system, participating in the communication and important information to the community. You're standing up there at the press conferences, being the people they elected. They're who they want to see, making sure that their voice is being heard in this process. So it's important that you participate in that. But it's also important that we're all speaking with one voice. So that's where, if you don't like a messaging that's coming out of the EOC, hey, no, we don't like the way this is phrased. It's a back and forth, and those hard discussions have to happen to make sure that we are speaking as one voice throughout the incident, right? You don't want to hear two different sides of a story. Everything should be what's really happening, but you want to say, hey, hey, what's our main focus to do X? Well, you're also focusing on Y over here, and we're sending another signal that Y is more important than X, right? We have to work through that, right? And that's where all this comes together. So speaking as one voice, but that's the part where your role is really important, right? Setting those priorities, looking at this, and making sure that the EOC is pushing down the chain, the correct prioritization, and what's in the best interest of your constituents and the public at large, right? So one of the roles you play in this is today, right? Not the when the disaster strikes EOC side of it, is this part. This is, I said, about 30%. 29% of Americans have not prepared at all because they think emergency responders will help them. And over 60% expect to rely on emergency responders in the first 72 hours of disaster. Both of those numbers are bad, right? Both of those numbers are not good. I'm very thankful to live where we live, right? How long do you think it's gonna take for an ambulance to get here if we just called them right now? Let's not do that. But how long do you think it would take them to get here? Yeah, they do have to get up from dinner and walk downstairs. But probably within 3 to 5 minutes is what I've been told. When I was a police officer, our response time was anywhere in the town within 3 minutes. As a police officer, I carried an EMT bag, oxygen bag, an AED in the trunk of my car. I was not an EMT, but I was trained in was first responder level, right? So within 3 minutes, you had some kind of first aid, right? I had a fire extinguisher. They didn't like it when I used it, but I can put out small fires with it, right? And of course, if it was a police function, I can do my job, right? So within 3 minutes, someone's showing up from that 911 system, right? Nearest level 1 trauma hospital? Harborview, right? If we're in Anchorage, Alaska, what's the nearest level 1 trauma hospital? Harborview, right? Little bit of a commute difference, right? A little bit of a time frame difference. 20 minutes, give or take traffic, or 5 hours, 6-hour flight, if we can get a bird in the air, right? So just think about that, right? We're very lucky that we do have the response we have. However, we all know, police and fire have staffing problems, right? How quickly then is that going to get overloaded if we have an earthquake, even a bad windstorm, lots of car accidents, lots of cats and trees at one time, right? It's pretty quick. So this part's concerning, that everyone thinks that within the first 72 hours, they can just rely on first responders. So we do this Prepare in a Year program is what the state and King County has kind of switched to. That kind of pushes to say, hey, you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to have every go bag ready all at once. You can start small, get some things. but mainly working on building up from what was, the 2-week ready to a month to preparing a year is really a resiliency for your whole family and your whole household. So, to really stress that for the first 72 hours, especially if it's not a serious thing, especially if it's a minor problem, you're going to be deprioritized. So you're on your own, right? If you lost your heat, you lost your air conditioning, but people are having, medical heart attacks and things like that, then they're going to get those services first. So being able to cordon off part of your house, have a backup generator or an alternate heat source, things like that, that preparedness. So when we're, running our CERT classes, or I'm talking to you guys about, hey, here's what our plan is for community points of distributions and how we're working in these neighborhoods with GMRS radios and FMS radios so we can communicate to our EOC. Understanding the role you play in supporting the preparedness efforts we're trying to put through at NEMCO to help better serve your community is important. And really, especially if you hear me we're all invited to our talks. You come to our talks and you hear us talking about how, hey, you might not get that. You might dial 911, it might not work, right? Hurricane Sandy for us, we had voice over IP Verizon phones. A 911 system switched to that. So Sandy hit, no one expected New York to flood. No one expected that those servers in the basement of these buildings in New York would be underwater. So 911 was a cop with a cell phone on the front steps of City Hall getting calls forwarded to him from the 911 system so we can then relay them on dispatch, right? So a lot of that system is very fragile. So when I talk about those stories, it's not to say, hey, the police aren't doing the job, firefighters aren't doing the job, city council not doing the job. It's to say, hey, when the system's stressed, you don't rely on the service to show up. Self-rescue, as they say, or at least prepare to do the best you can, and also understand where the line is. Like, yes, you need to make sure you're calling 911. And then here's kind of the principles of preparedness, right? Collaboration, integration, personal and organizational preparedness, and volunteer service, which I'm very big on, if you couldn't tell by volunteering for 2 different fire departments. So the target is you have, and this is what I started to describe earlier when we talked about that going up the chain, local to federal. This is a rounder version of a similar idea. Individuals and families being prepared, us here in Kenmore, our local government being prepared, our neighborhoods being prepared, and then out to your private entities, non-government organizations. That's like your next buffer, right? I know they closed, just putting it in a complex here, but when you had all those backhoes and all that heavy equipment up there, I think most of it might have worked. I know it was going to auction, but if you really needed a piece of equipment, if you had a debris management, debris emergency where we winds, storms, earthquake, things are down, you had a whole, stockpile of backhoes. Well, that's a huge resource, and to know what's in your community and how to take that and help. And that's another role you guys have, because you do all live in Kenmore. You do all drive around every day. You do all see, oh, so-and-so's doing construction over here. They have this around. Keep that in your mind, because those third parties become part of the system. When I came on, you guys had signed on to the King County response framework, right? Private entities can do that. That's a mutual aid agreement, a pre-arranged mutual aid agreement. We've all agreed to pay in case we were going to lend a resource somewhere, right? And they've agreed to lend us resources. And so, but private entities can sign on to that too. And the idea is that we know who has the cranes and those things that are available to us. And then, of course, our state and tribal and federal governments, right? The outer ring, right? So we start in the middle and we work our way out. So you're supporting the connectivity to enable the incident managers to act in a unified and consistent manner. These are just kind of some school graphics I like because it shows the overlay of some things. This is a better version of the pyramid in a lot of ways. You're setting policy at the top ring. The overlaps with the EOC's coordination support, and then but all the comms, SOPs, resource management, the minutia of what's being done is all happening in the EOC under your policy direction, but it's all happening in the EOC, and then going down to your command and operations out in the field, right? So it's kind of like the pancaked model of it. And then this is kind of the joint information system here, right? Where you have the policy group helping to develop their support policies, and then really develop setting standards about resource allocation. You can do that too. And then across to the EOC, down to the incident, right? How this all kind of plays in. And this is the exercise, which I don't think necessarily need to do unless you guys are really, really loving this and want to stay here for another hour. But that's the slide portion of my day, and I was an hour and 5 minutes-ish, right? Pretty close. Do you have any questions for me? about this, about anything else, I avail myself to your questions and comments.
Questions? Councilmember Lutzis.
So I assume that our main role would be in some sort of major incident as part of the MAC group. You know, I guess some context to that question is if, you know, some of us are potentially ham radio trained or something like that and wear different hats. Our priority though is the MAC group, and we should leave that unless something else happens.
Yeah, generally
Right.
speaking. So this is the piece of wearing different hats, right? While your ham radio skills will come in handy, and there is one back there, we check it, you know, the third Friday of every month, still works. Maybe you're the one that, you know, instead of sending over Rob to give a brief, we can just do it over ham radio and you can get on there. There's a tool there. There's a tool to that piece. Your primary focus though is to be part of this. So a great example is we have one of your public works employees volunteers with our group as well, because we do a lot of training. We do a Tuesday meeting that has like midi training, and then following Saturdays like more intense training, you know, water purification or cribbing or a lot of rescue stuff. And he's like, oh, this is cool. I want to learn about this. Took our CERT basic class, did all that, but he's a public works employee. So when the incident happens, he's going to work, right? He's going to go and focus on that. He's going to find that part of the system. Now, if it's a different type of incident, if he's not needed, could he also show up and throw on a CERT vest and go do the CERT thing? Yes, he could. And he's welcome to. Or it's a pre-planned event in Lake Forest Park, right? Because he's probably going to be working the fireworks here. But if, say, on a different date, a Saturday afternoon, there's something going on in Lake Forest Park, he wants to throw on that CERT vest and the helmet, he's more than welcome to do so. But he's wearing his different roles, different responsibilities. Another great example is medical stuff, right? We have a couple doctors and nurses on our teams. So when they come in though, and they put on a CERT vest, they're operating under the protection and legal authorities of CERT, which stops at Good Samaritan law, basic first aid, AED, you know, the things that we teach and that are supported by those policies, not his medical training as a doctor to do a tracheotomy or something like that, or take out someone's appendix in the field, right? He's not going to do any of that because it's outside his scope with the hat he's wearing at that point. So if we have an incident, you're a council member, that's your priority, go to that first. More than welcome to volunteer to get more knowledge, learn, right? Anyone taking our classes, I encourage it. City Council over in Lake Forest Park, one of their members is coming to all of our emergency radio classes because we're developing the system with the GMRS, FMRS side of things that neighborhoods, actually one of the ones that just over your border, or just at the edge of your border in Kenmore here, they already have their Map My Neighborhood group that they've already been doing preparedness stuff, and they are already using those radios. They're trying to link in with the EOC, so we're going to combine and do a functional exercise with them in March, well, the end of this month. So that has a role, and she's coming to those classes, taking all of them, but push comes to shove, she'll be in the policy group and has a role as the city council first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Cool. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and look forward to working with you guys in the future. A reminder, just another plug, ICS 100, 200, 700, 800. Make sure we get those done. And then we'll forward the email with the links and stuff to you, so this way you have them. So, all right.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation and the training. We really appreciate it. With that, there's no further business to come before us. The Kenmore City Council is adjourned.